Hello. This is Becky. Give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. Just want to make sure we were connected. How is everybody doing tonight? Hopefully well. Again, this is Becky Dykes, still at Life Inspiration Box. I'm getting your videos pulled up so that we can see the comments. And tonight, in case you did not see my little sneak preview, tonight we are going to talk all about fonts. And tonight is Monday, so that means that we are talking about Cricut users, Cricut Design Space, all things Cricut. So all of our fonts. Now, I'm not saying that you Silhouette watchers can't learn a thing or two about fonts. This can be like your sneak preview for what we're going to be talking about on Wednesday. You kind of get ahead of the game. But strictly speaking, when we start working with fonts, we are going to be working with them in Cricut Design Space. So super exciting. I'm going to just a couple more minutes. Let me see. What else can I do? I will say that I'm broadcasting from home because I just had to kick all my kids off of their video games. So I sent them out for some much needed outdoors time anyway. All about fonts. Okay. So I'm going to ramble on for just a second about fonts. So fonts can be a little testy, but they are a very valuable resource for any crafting. And one thing that I see a lot in regards to especially using fonts in Cricut Design Space, you can see how my script fonts do not go together. So we're going to talk about that just to give you an overview of what's coming. We're going to talk about, if you're on PC, how to download a font. That is the only part that if you happen to be on a Mac, I do not have a Mac, so I cannot help you. But if you have a Mac and you need to know how to install a font, leave a comment and I will point you in the direction of some good resources for people who have Macs. Okay, so we're going to install a font for all of our PC users. And then we are going to talk about how to get it into Cricut Design Space. And then we're going to talk about using text and what you would use text for. We will talk about how to preview text. We have a really great shortcut so that you don't have to go through all of your text individually. And then we'll talk about this kerning and welding. It's helpful for all types of text, but it's especially noticeable when you start talking about script text. And then finally, we will wrap it up talking about glyphs and what glyphs are and how do you access glyphs and that sort of thing. So lots of things about fonts today. All right, I think I gave everybody a little bit of time to join us. So let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to talk about fonts. They're pretty common now. You can download them from all different resources. There are different websites. You can buy them for commercial use. You can use them for personal use. Just depend on what your end goal is. If you plan on making anything to sell, whether it's a digital file or a physical item, just remember that you do have to have a commercial license for your fonts to be able to do that, okay? But I won't harp on that too much. Of course, Craft Chameleon has some really awesome fonts. You get a free font every 2 weeks, so make sure that you sign up for their newsletter because their fonts are just really awesome. And in my opinion, they're really different. And I think they also really correspond with kind of the feel you get with their blanks and their designs, and that means a lot to me, being able to keep the same feel for the projects that I'm doing. So once you have found the font that you want, we're gonna we're gonna talk about how to install it on your computer. So these are some examples of some fonts that I have downloaded already. Now, these are already installed, but I just searched up here for OTF. That's open type font. You can do OTF and you can do TTF. Um, I'll be honest with you, I'm not a font professional in that regards to sit here and explain all the differences to you between OTF and TTF. But I've always read and heard that OTF is the direction that you want to go because it is more flexible or compatible with new or updated softwares that you might have on your computer and that sort of thing. So I just have always gravitated towards OTF unless for some reason, sometimes you'll find that OTF is not available. That's okay. All right, so when you download a font, it'll usually go to your fonts, or I mean your downloads folder, and then you can go in there. Sometimes it'll be zipped. Let's see, do I have a zipped folder in here? Yeah, so like this one is zipped, so I would have to open that folder up. Okay, and then you can see there's my OTF right there. Okay, but for the sake of the other ones, let's see OTF. All right, so when you download them and you find this file in your downloads folder, you can double click and get a preview of what these fonts look like. Okay, now usually if you've downloaded it, then you already know what it's going to look like, but just in case, every now and then I'll go through and do like a font clean out, right? So when you decide that you're ready to install, you can double click and you can just hit the install button right up here. And that literally will take care of it. Now it's going to tell me I already have it installed. So I'm going to click no, but it'll say installing and the little loading sign will go all the way over and then it'll be installed on your computer. And that is literally all there is to installing a font. Now, what I do want to say is as long as the file is not zipped, you can also, without having to go into it, you can right click on the individual font and you can choose install or install for all users. Install should normally be fine. And it will walk you through the same process. Okay. And then last but not least, and the reason that I had all of these pulled up is because sometimes I will just go on like the font downloading spree and you don't want to have to go through each one individually. You can locate where they're at, get them all in one place, select them all at one time, right click, and install that way. Okay, so just to let you know, because sometimes if you, because you have to restart your software when you install fonts, and I usually leave the software running in the background. So if I'm going to take the time to close down my software and reopen it, I figure I might as well install more than just one lonely font. Okay, so once it's on your computer, let's talk about getting it into Cricut Design Space. So I kind of already gave you the answer. All you have to do is close your software and open it back up. Okay. If you're a Silhouette user, that's going to be the same thing for you. It's pretty standard that you have to close whatever software you're working on and reopen it for it to be able to recognize the new fonts and get them pulled into the software. Okay. Now, when you're working in Cricut Design Space and you decide that you want to select a font, so you clicked font, and these are the different previews that you get. And that's really exciting. But as you notice, like if you start scrolling down, it gives you a mix of fonts that you have to purchase. This one is $4.99, and fonts that are already in your library. So if you notice, you have some options up here at the top. And not that one, if you click on system, then these are going to be the fonts that are loaded from your system, including fonts that you have downloaded, right? So if you know the name of the font that you want to use, you can type it in here. As a matter of fact, the font that I'm using right now is this one. So once you get the font selected, this is kind of where the real fun comes in. Oh, you know what? Let me backtrack. Because I want to show you. Well, I'll open a new window. So this, I mean, this is not a secret for everybody, but it might be a secret for you. So I want to show you real quick. If you go to a website, it's called wordmark.it. Okay. This will allow you to preview any of the fonts that are on your computer. So I know it's kind of weird, but I'm actually really picky about B's for my name. So a lot of times I'll like a font, but I might not like the way that the B looks. So what I can do is I can come here and I can load all the fonts that are on my computer and preview them all at once. I think because I'm live, it's taken a little bit. Let me see, show your fonts. Let me see, where are my pretty fonts at? Oh, there's one that loaded. Impact is on there. Okay, so they're slowly catching up. Some of them are kind of stuck in a standard mode, but if you give it just a second after you hit your preview, it'll go through and it'll show you all the different fonts that are on your computer and how they look in a certain word. And then all you have to do is whenever, or if you like several, you can select more than one. But this tells you the name, right? So I can actually copy this. Control C, and then when I come over here to select my font, I can paste that name up here. That way I don't have to try to, go back and forth. Oh, how did I spell it? Did I spell it wrong? Did I spell it right? That sort of thing. So that'll catch up in just a second. And there we go. So that is actually how that font looked. So once we start talking about previewing fonts, there is also, let me see. I exit out of that. Okay, there is this filter over here to the right hand side. And you can select different options that way too. Now I clicked on my fonts, so it's showing me all the fonts that I've downloaded. Okay, but what it did not load are fonts that it did not load my computer fonts. Okay, does that make sense? Like, you know how every computer comes with like a set of system fonts? This only loaded the ones that I've downloaded. That's why they're considered my fonts versus system fonts. Okay, and then you can also, and this will more depend on ones if you have purchased from the Silhouette, or not Silhouette, the Cricut online store. You can select if they're single layer, multi-layer, writing style. That is important. I don't have any downloaded right now, but writing would be like if you want to use sketch pens or anything like that. And then saved for offline would also be ones coming from the Cricut store. Okay, just trying to make sure we cover everything before we move forward. So that is more or less what you need to know about downloading, getting them installed, and selecting them. Now let's go ahead and talk about what I want to use. I'm going to select a different font. I can't get past that font. Because as you notice when you joined, let's see. Okay, so remember we were talking about how we have all these spaces? So it's important that you understand, just like when you were writing, um, that your letters are supposed to connect together. Okay, so it does not naturally do that in Cricut Design Space. And that's kind of a bummer, but you do have the option of letter spacing here and line spacing. So let's get the easy one out of the way. The line spacing does exactly what it says, and it brings these two closer together. Okay, now these are farther apart, and I'll tell you why in just a few minutes when we start talking about some more options. But your letter spacing will do the same thing. It will bring your letters together, hopefully until they all touch. Okay, and then you would want to weld them together. Now sometimes you notice with these T's down here and this S, that's because it's taking into account where the U ends and the T begins over here. Let me see. No, I don't want to mess with that. But what you can do is use your ungroup and then select the font or the letters and move them over manually. Now that's not always like the easiest thing to do, but I find that I do that a lot anyway because, for example, I don't really care for how this hello looks. I don't like when my L's are stacked like that. So I'll move my L, still make sure that it's overlapped, but then I can move my O wherever I want. So don't be afraid to ungroup and move your letters manually either, but that's just something to really look for when you're working with fonts, um, especially fonts with glyphs. So let's talk about glyphs. What are glyphs and what do I need them for? So glyphs are the special characters that come with certain fonts. The reason I am using this font is because it has some pretty cool glyphs. And that's also the reason why there are there's such a large space between my two when I had them typed out earlier, because fonts will naturally, as long as they're programmed correctly, they will naturally accommodate for different letters and glyphs and make sure that there is enough room around them. And what I mean by that is, have you ever noticed that, if you have a letter that drops down like a Y, or, a letter that comes up, then your text box will accommodate that. Let me show you. Before I ungroup these. Okay, so see how it comes all the way down here to incorporate the bottom of the F? Okay, now that doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but the same thing happens when there are more characters that may expand outside of the normal typing area. Okay, so I'm rambling on. I'm not making a lot of sense. Let me just go and show you. The way to do it in Cricut Design Space is you want to open your, oh, well, I've closed mine out. I thought I had it open already. But you want to open your character map. No, I just used my little search bar down here to open it. But your character map is your guide within the PC world, as long as you're on Windows, to find the glyphs that you need. Now, there are other softwares out there. I'm not saying this is the only way, but this is the only way to do it without installing a different software on your computer. And we'll talk about that later on. So with this one in particular, that's the font that I'm already working with. I'm going to go down to Group. I'm going to choose the Unicode subrange, and I'm going to scroll down to private use characters. More times than not, this is where all your glyphs are going to be hiding. Okay, and if you notice, once I click on these, it gives me not a big preview, but a little preview of different glyphs that are available. So I like this one. All right, I think that's a B. And I'm going to choose select, and it copies that character here, right? and then I'm going to hit copy. Now when I come back over here, now it's important for me to say that I have the same font selected in both places. So when I double click here, and I put that glyph in here, see how I get a little square here, but I get my actual glyph down here. Okay, and this is now hopefully making more sense when I said there was all this room in between, because this font is programmed for glyphs that reach much farther down than the normal font that it would. Okay, so now I can finish typing out my name. If I wanted to, move my spaces back together, and I would more or less be ready to weld this and go. Okay, but if you ever are using a glyph, and let me show you what happens if I don't have the same font selected. Let my computer catch up just a minute. No fonts. Okay, if I were to select a different font, I do strangely get a different glyph here. So that must have been programmed in there already. But a lot of times you'll get like a square. Yeah, there we go. You'll get a square and it's kind of like, wait, why do I have a square? Where did my glyph go? That sort of thing. That's perfectly normal. That is perfectly fine, because that just means that is what is there for this font. So like this one doesn't have a glyph that's programmed for that exact special character. All right, so if you ever copy and paste your glyph over here and you get a box, that means that you have a difference in your fonts. This font up here in Cricut does not match this font in your character map. So what that means is either if you've selected the wrong font over here in character map, you need to select the right one, find your glyph and copy. More often than not, it just means that you have the wrong font selected in design space, and you just need to come over here and select the right one. Oh, that one's the wrong one. There we go. Okay, so that is what glyphs are and what they're used for. There are a lot of fonts that you can download with glyphs. They're a lot of times your pretty characters. This one's pretty extreme. That you're not going to find a lot of fonts that have characters like this, but like another one that I have. Oh, what's it called? There we go. Like this one is called Falling Leaves, and it has all these extras. Okay, so what I could do is I could type out my alphabet, and honestly, that's what I used to do. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Then I would go through and select any of the ones that I want. But now I know I can just select them in my character map and paste that over here. Okay, so there are certain fonts. A lot of times those special characters and glyphs will be advertised at the time that you download or purchase the font, because they're a pretty big attraction. People seem to really like fonts that have glyphs. Okay, now let's also talk about when we had the script font. We kind of glazed over this part. I know that we reduced our letter spacing, but don't forget with your script fonts, you do have to weld these together. Okay, because otherwise what'll happen is these parts of your letters that are overlapping, they will actually cut into each other. And not only will it look ugly when your design is done, but it will also cause your design to, it could cause it to peel in those areas, because smaller areas of vinyl, they have smaller amounts of adhesive. I think that makes pretty good sense. And they don't stick as well. So they will come off easier and sooner. So for example, if I'm putting this on a tumbler and I have these little pieces that are cut into my E or my C, then those are the pieces that I can expect will peel off first. So does anybody have any questions so far? I'm not seeing any questions, and that's perfectly fine. Um, I am going to switch over to the other video. Bear with me on my phone and just make sure that nobody has any questions over there. No, no questions. Okay, so everybody seems to be doing good. Um, there's another thing that you need to keep in mind when you're using fonts is that there are shapes and let me see, I guess like the letter D or B would be some of the best examples. And I'm going to choose a different font because I don't really need a fancy font. I want just a basic font. Basic font. Okay, what if we do this one? Okay. All right, so a lot of times when you're setting up designs, you will need even some of the most basic shapes. And sometimes you just don't feel like drawing them by hand, or maybe you're not a very good drawer, and that's fine. But a lot of times, if you look at the shapes that are given to you, then you can kind of wing it on your own. Okay, so if I were to ungroup, I can manipulate this a little bit. There we go, I want to unlock. Okay, so I can change these however I want. Oh, we got to unlock for that one too. Okay, so like this D, for example, let me see. I can copy and paste, and I can move this around however I want. And this is just a very basic example, but I can move this around, and if I do this enough times, then I will actually end up with a flower all the way around, right? Okay, so I won't do that all the way, but let's talk about, there are other things like this little character. A lot of times if you need like a little swoosh or, something that goes with it, or if you need a circle, you can use a period. Don't, ignore these types of characters when you start thinking about setting up your own basic designs. As a matter of fact, what made me think of this one was I have a file. Let me show you real quick. What month is this? This is April. I did my own little sanitized file. Let's get that sharing. And do you recognize what this shape here is? That is actually the exact same shape that I just showed you in Cricut Design Space, right? So you just have to think outside the box when it comes to using fonts and their special characters. As long as you have the commercial use for it, then you are absolutely within your rights to be able to piece together the little individual accents or shapes or parts of a letter to get it looking the way that you wanted without having to start from scratch. So one time I actually saw someone, let me delete this, but they wanted to do like mermaid scales. So what they did is that's what they used their D for. And now they were doing these in cardstock, so they were cutting them individually. But you would be able to do the same thing. It's just use your Ds over and over and over to get that fish scale or mermaid scale or whatever scale shape that you need. So a lot of times too, I will use a font and kind of make my own glyph. One in particular, like I really do a lot of designs with home. Let's get it up here. I want a different font. Let's see. Can I do this font? Okay, so for some reason, and maybe it's just me, but I really like when my H has a little glyph that can come down right there. Okay, it just seems to kind of round out my design sometimes, but not every font that I choose has that glyph on there, or they have that specific H to use. I'm going to ungroup this. I'm actually going to copy and paste and move all these over. HOME. Okay, so I'll weld these together. In theory, those should be completely fine. That would be a complete cut file. But I'm not really happy, like I said, with the H. So what I can do is I can draw a basic shape. Hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully this isn't too far out in left field. Okay, and if I select these two together and slice, let me see, can I ungroup these? Nope. All right, so I didn't go far enough. Let's see, let's do it like this. Slice. And then I'm left with that little piece there. I don't actually want the rest of those. But what I would be able to do is now I can manipulate this however I want to be able to give me a little tail here. Let's see, so actually if I left it like this, so that wouldn't be too bad. That would give me just a little bit of lead in to my H. Okay, so, I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else, but that's definitely something that I seem to do quite often, especially, you get stuck on certain fonts and you're like, man, I really love that font. I just really wish that it had a T that did this, or, sometimes that, like I talked about, having the L's that are stacking together. And you can do the same thing with, so let's talk about T's, because they are just like the bane of my existence. Okay. So for example, if I'm typing out a name that has two T's, I don't really want both of my T's just to be stacked like that. I don't even, well, I guess that might be kind of cool depending, but usually when you think about writing cursive, you think about, coming up with your two T's and then doing one single line across. So how would you do that? A lot of script fonts that have the glyphs or the extra characters, they will take care of that for you, and they'll have a glyph that shows that exact T that you can go in and select it special. But we can actually repeat the same thing that we just did, and I can come in. I'm going to unlock that. That's kind of a pain. And I can overlap with my T here. Oops, I didn't want to move him. I can slice. And then I would be able to do the same thing with the other side. Shape, square. slice. Okay, so now that's exactly what I have. Now I'm going to turn this guy back a little bit because that's how he originally was. I had to turn him. But if I were to weld these together, then I would have my T that would just have the one line across. So, don't be afraid to kind of get out there and make your own glyphs. And, these may not be things that you think about all the time, but, I'm just a real big fan of thinking outside the box. So, all right, so let's recap. I think I'm going to work on winding it up. I think I bored you guys long enough with fonts. So we talked about installing a font. We installed a font on our PC and what it takes to get the font into the software, which is surprisingly easy. You just restart your software. And then working with fonts and Cricut, especially script fonts, you will have to watch your spacing and possibly move them by hand if needed. We want to weld characters together. That way we don't have overlapping issues with letters cutting into each other. And we talked about glyphs and using your character map. Now, I do want to say if you're a really big fan of glyphs, that part gets much easier when you jump over to the silhouette. So just, not saying you guys can't keep doing it in Cricut, but eventually I'm going to get some of you moved over to the silhouette software, even if you do continue to cut on Cricut, because that's what I do. I design in silhouette and I cut on my Cricut Maker. So glyphs, what they were for, how to get to them, and how to kind of make your own glyphs. And I think we covered a lot of really good information. So I'm going to wrap it up, but I appreciate you joining me tonight. And my kids will be very relieved that they can get back on the video games. And if you have any questions, please feel free to comment. And, even if it's just to say hello or things that maybe you want to see next week or, whatever. We just always love the comments. We love the questions. And that's all I have for tonight. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks. Bye.